Set to join us right now here on Birds 365. As we bring him in, you can follow him at Brandon Gowton and read all his work at bleedinggreennation.com. Truly one of the best Eagles websites there is. BLG, what's going on, man? How you doing on this Wednesday morning? A lot of change since we last talked, and it wasn't too long ago.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, let's get into it.
Well, we're going to come in hot because I thought that was a good question. I really haven't thought about it because we talk about so many other things. But the question was, do you think Jalen Hurts wanted this new offense?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think Jalen, so the perception of Jalen, right, and the kind of like what gets purported, and I'm not saying this isn't true, but like what we believe to be true is that, he wants to do what it takes to win, right? Like that's kind of the tagline, like the pitch. But obviously within that, that could be true of a lot of people, but there's going to be naturally preferences. That's going to happen wherever. I don't think anyone's just like, oh, total blank slate. Yeah, just tell me what to do, boss, right? Like I don't think quarterbacks are wired that way. I don't think that's how it works as human beings. So I think Jalen is open to changes, at least based on what I've known about him in the past, to be coachable. But again, he's going to have his own ideas and preferences within that. So I do think open to changes, but also wants to be involved and have ownership and say in what the offense looks like.
BLG, interesting spot for this team. I think many people, me included, I'm pretty sure you included as well, but I won't speak for you. We watched the offense not only this year, the last couple of years, and it didn't look good. I mean, there was a lot there to pick apart, and at many times I personally called for change, called for a different looking offense, get A.J. Brown more involved, get Devontae Smith more involved. Well, I didn't know they'd go this far, BLG, to the point that Jeff Stoutland is out the door. Did they go too far to you? Is this the appropriate change based on what the offense has been able to do the last couple of years? Where's the breaking point? And do you think they reached it? How do you kind of view the loss of Jeff Stoutland and what it means for the change that this team's about to undergo?
I think it's a massive loss. And I think anyone trying to convince themselves otherwise is kind of like coping, really, to be quite frank. Like the idea that like, change, we have to sacrifice one of the best position coaches in the NFL who's been a major part of why we won 2 Super Bowls here. I mean, those offensive lines from those Super Bowl teams were a huge reason each of those teams won a championship, mind you. And then just not to mention even the player development within that. It's beyond what those lines were this year, but to be able to get to that point, I think losing him is a massive loss. And really, the Eagles didn't want to lose him, by the way. This isn't like, the Eagles are deciding we need to move on and, really change everything. See you, Jeff Stoutland. Thanks for everything, but no thanks. No, they wanted to keep him. It's just that they didn't want to keep him in a certain way that, was probably more so of his old role and having him, be the run game coordinator as well. And therefore, obviously, he didn't want to stay at a point where, he feels like he's not getting, the input that he is used to having and has, quite frankly, built up the equity to have. So I don't buy it as a good thing for the Eagles for sure.
So how do you couch that? Because I agree with you. Obviously, going from Jeff Stoutland to Chris Cooper, and I'm not picking on Chris Cooper, but his history is his history, and Minnesota hasn't had a good offensive line or a good running game, and they didn't want him back because they felt they needed to change. So I'm with you from that just pure obvious standpoint. Like one guy's better than the other guy, and we'll give Chris Cooper a chance, and it's a difficult situation, but if it's the fact that, look, come hell or high water, they want to run this Shanahan McVay type scheme, and that means more wide zone, outside zone stretch, and you got to play a different style, and he doesn't want to get on board. How do you couch that, or do you try to piecemeal it? How do you save that situation?
Yeah, I don't know if I fully believe he didn't want to get on board, just from a standpoint of like, I don't think Jeff Stoutland's track record suggests like he can't do this, considering how long he's coached, considering how good of a coach he is. It could be an adjustment. And also, like, I think at some level it's Nick Sirianni's job to get him on board and figure that out. Like, Nick Sirianni has to be, in control of his staff. and be able to like kind of maybe mend fences here and make things work. Like that's part, I think, of what he has to do within his scope. So I just think it's unacceptable. It's an unacceptable loss. I think this idea, like it's so binary. Like you either have to pick this scheme or you have to pick Jeff Stoutland. Like that to me, why can't we have it all? Like I think there has to be a better job of being able to make that work than they did. I don't think you can sit there here and say like, oh, they did the best job they possibly could. Like I find that hard to believe.
Well, I love your use of the word binary there because I've been talking to John about this. Like, where is if Nick Sirianni's offense is here and West Coast is here, does it have to be either here or here? Can the Eagles go from here to maybe here or here? But BLG, where I change now is they got rid of Stoutland, which means they're committing in a pretty significant way, to this new style of offense to the point where Jeff Stoutland didn't want to be a part of it anymore and stepped away. That to me would signal that maybe they're really going for it, dude, and they're going to try and run full West Coast. I don't know if they will or not, but does that make you think that they're going to be more, closer to that full West Coast approach than not?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that, they're going to try different things, and that's commendable. Trying different things is commendable, but just kind of like when, there's a scheme change or, there's something with like a star player who's clearly a good talent, and it's like, well, he doesn't fit this scheme. Well, it's like, well, maybe the scheme isn't that great if the star player doesn't fit into it. And I kind of, feel that same way.
Maybe you shouldn't hire a scheme.
That too.
That's where I am.
Amen.
It's a cliche for a reason in the NFL. If you're hiring a scheme, you're doing it wrong. I'm sure you've heard that many times over the years, BLG. Yep. And everybody does it. Why is it? It's bizarre to me.
It's like a fallback. It's just like, well, this didn't work, so we're just going to default to this, right? Or try this because it's the hot, trendy thing, which honestly, in a way, like, okay, you're looking at it from a standpoint of there are worse paths to pursue, I would think, but logically. But at the same time, the Eagles themselves will talk about how, like, how much pride they take in, like, zagging when everyone else zigs.
Yeah.
Like, they want to be on the forefront of innovation. And this is not the forefront of innovation.
No.
You're following the pack at this
point.
Groupthink.
It's groupthink. It is pure groupthink. And by the way, because everybody, half the league now is running a version of the Shanahan-McVay scheme. Half the league. So that to me, from a logic standpoint, what does that mean? Instead of being that innovator, not the copy, that means, all right, who's going to do it best? That makes it less likely to win. Are you going to do it as well as Sean McVay? Are you going to do it as well as Kyle Shanahan? Certainly not right away. Maybe down the road you can get better personnel, better talent. Ironically, though, I think when you look at the good coaches, and Sean McVay this year, to me, this was his best coaching job because for years he's been the illusion of complexity guy, the 11 personnel, all 11 personnel. And this year, he didn't have deep receiving room. Devontae got hurt at the end. And he goes to all this 13. He's playing 3 tight ends because he had a bunch of good tight ends. Even he morphs. But everybody, we got to play this scheme. We got to play this scheme. Fuck the scheme. BLG. I don't understand it. I really don't. And I find it hard to believe after talking to Nick Sirianni for 5 years that he woke up one day and said, you know what? I got to go copy these guys. Like, where is this coming from? That's my concern.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of assistants left on staff that are, his guys, what's it down to? It's Kevin Patullo, I guess, is still here for now. Jamal Singleton's going to be here. Aaron Moorhead was hired before, Nick got here. Going back to Doug.
Final year of Doug. Yeah, Parks Razorback. That surprised me. Obviously in a different role. And some of the lower level guys. But of the major position coaches, it's just and maybe Scott Loeffler will be back, but that seems to me they're waiting to see. And that's just speculation. I think they're waiting for Greg Olson, I think. But if the Raiders have him under contract and they want him back, you might have to keep Scott Loeffler. But it seems like they don't want to keep him. So that would leave just Singleton and just Moorhead, which is a lot different than 2024 when everybody brings that up. Kellen Moore, they gave Kellen Moore, Doug Nussmeier, and Kyle Valero. That's it. Nobody even knows who Kyle Valero is. And now they've shifted dramatically. And I don't think that's coming from Nick Sirianni. I just don't believe it.
I think it speaks to, like the team was not happy with like how the offense went last year. And really it was a case of like they empowered Nick and gave him his choice of offensive coordinator, at least what you would guess was his choice. And almost like hey, you won the Super Bowl, great job. You get this. This is what you get. You get to be in charge of that. Contrast to how he didn't have that when they brought in Kellen Moore after 2023. And now you're in a spot where maybe even less so, like you just said, with the amount of assistants that are different from, bringing in with a new offensive coordinator as well than it was with Kellen Moore, that it's like, hey, Nick, we don't really trust you that much, which is crazy to me. Why? And like, I know you're not going to fire the Super Bowl winning head coach like a year later, but what is this like kind of half measure approach where like you clearly don't fully believe in the coach to the extent I think of the new assistants you're bringing in, but he's still here. It's a weird approach to me. It might work out, but it feels a little like they're kind of the waters are murky here.
Well, and to your point, real quick, sorry, Dan. To your point, Howie is the author of "We want to zig when everybody else zags." He's the one who says it. So I don't think it's Howie. I think it's Jeffrey. Am I wrong in your percent or not? I think it's all coming from Jeffrey.
That makes sense. I think, there's layers, as we know.
Yeah.
But it does feel like kind of like a heavy-handed ownership, Jeffrey Lurie thinking and thinking in the right place, I will say, in terms of like big picture, like we need to improve the offense. How do we do that? Like, yes, correct. But how you're going about that, that might not be necessarily the most conducive way to success based on what they've done thus far.
BLG, my next question has to do with the personnel, and I understand the challenges that come with this as opposed to changing coaches, but dude, this is a lot of change on the coaching staff. How much change are you expecting the personnel to follow? I mean, John's talked about it on the show. We've even talked about it a little bit. This team, they don't really have the build out of the right players for this style of offense. Now, they're all talented guys. I'm sure it will work to some extent, but the offensive line's a bunch of maulers. The running back is not great in catching the ball out of the backfield. It's not great in pass protection, not great with the short, in the short game outside of running the football. How much personnel change do you think will follow this much change to the offensive coaching staff?
I think first of all, I think this isn't talked about enough because naturally, we're all focusing on the coaching staff this time of year. It's what's in the news. Free agency isn't for a month still. So I get it. But I mean, the bigger question to me is what the talent looks like, what the roster looks like, because there's so many questions. And I think we're so used to being like, oh, the Eagles have one of the most talented offenses in the NFL. Because they've had that for the past so many years here. And I mean, I guess it's possible a scenario like that unfolds where that's still the case, but it's also possible not even close from a standpoint of we don't know if A.J. Brown's going to be here, Lane Johnson, Landon Dickerson. We don't know if Cam Jurgens will get back to what he was. Dallas Goedert's a free agent. Jahan Dotson's a free agent. Again, not a great player, but someone you still have to fill those snaps somehow. So there's on one hand, if you're an optimist, you could say there's open holes for the team to maybe get better, and maybe we overrated the talent last season, and let's say you crush the draft and you make some good free agent additions, you work the trade market. There's potential for upside, but there's also a lot of potential, I feel like, for downside, and they don't get adequate replacements for a lot of these guys. And all of a sudden we're like, this ain't one of the top offenses in the NFL from a talent standpoint anymore.
Yeah, that's fair. From the standpoint, and I was thinking about this because everybody to this point, and it's mock draft season. Everybody's going to start with that as the combine starts later this month. And really, the guy I've seen connected to the Eagles early on more than anybody else is Caden Proctor, the big offensive tackle from Alabama. He's like 6'7", 360. And to me, right off the bat, BLG, I'm like, yeah, if Jeff Stoutland was here, it's the typical Eagles that we think of. This guy's the perfect fit. You know, he could probably start inside a guard and be a Mekhi Becton-like presence and then kick out, what they've been looking for over the past number of years as the heir apparent to Lane Johnson. Makes 100% complete sense. I'd probably pick him in my mock draft. Now I'm like, you want a 6'7", 360-pound kid reach blocking all Sunday afternoon, trying to angle guys as they kick out and move like Alex Gibbs? Do we have to start thinking about different philosophies for the personnel from Howie's perspective? And then the second part of that is, we don't even know if Vic Fangio is going to be back next year or Nick Sirianni. Mm-hmm. So is it just, if you're Howie, how do you handle that? Is it just, I'm taking the best players?
I think it's, you know, at the end of the day, it's Howie taking the best players, but I think it's inarguable that Jeff Stoutland had a lot of input on what they did with the offensive line, and they really leaned on his voice there. I don't know what that looks like now. I don't know that they really trust Chris Cooper. I don't know that's definitely the case. I don't know what Chris Cooper likes. Maybe they just go with what they think Jeff Stoutland would have liked anyway. I don't know. It's a huge question that we have to figure out here, because like you said, for the longest time we just kind of knew, you know, what to expect from what Jeff Stoutland likes, how the Eagles respect his opinion, how they're gonna, you know, use that information to inform their decision making. But yeah, now we don't know. We're kind of flying blind here with Chris Cooper.
BLG, what are you thinking on the free agency coming up? You got Phillips, Blankenship, Dean, Dallas Goedert's a big one. I think that's obviously, you know, important too with the offensive changes. Where do you think the priority lies? And do you feel strongly about one guy or another that they'll either sign him or not re-sign him?
Yeah, I think the big one, obviously, to figure out is Jalen Phillips. Probably try to get a sense of what his market is. I'm guessing it's going to be pretty big. If that number is out of control, as I've said here multiple times, like you just don't hand him a blank check. The number is way crazy high, then I think you just kind of have to let him walk. You could potentially, you know, get the comp pick back for him, depending on what else you do in free agency. But that's the thing. If you let him walk, you're going to have to figure out a way to replace him, because all you have is Jalen Hunt and Nolan Smith, basically, at that point. You know, maybe you bring BG back for another year. Seems like he wants to play. I think he can play, but I don't even know if he's an edge rusher moving forward, as much as he looks really good on the interior there.
Yeah.
So they have a lot to figure out. I think if and then Jalen, you have to figure out, I think, Jalen Phillips first.
All right, AJ Brown to me is even really above Jalen Phillips,
sure.
But in a different method. You have to make the decision. You have to decide where you're going to go. Made some news out at the Super Bowl, talking to Micah Parsons, said all the right things. Is that just both sides? Where has that shifted your mind? I know you've been more, AJ's not going to be back. Did that shift it at all for Brandon Gowton?
No. And again, I want AJ. I think AJ should be here. This isn't like I'm of the mind that AJ needs to be gone, so therefore I'm
no.
That's
yeah, I know.
And I'm not. You're saying that, but I feel like I get that a lot.
Yeah.
That's not the case. I think he should be here, but I also look at reality and I see, he's probably not going to be. Very likely to me, not going to be here. So I can't ignore that and project what I think should happen on what will happen. Those are two different things. Like when you're making a mock draft, like, okay, you can make one where you want the things to happen, but there's another one where, like, the more information, the more useful one typically is the one where you're projecting what will happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, I didn't change anything for me. I think it's a matter of AJ, like, doing the right things in terms of it doesn't make it easier for him if he does want to trade to, put up a stink and make it harder for the Eagles to trade him at that point. So I think he's saying all the right things. But more important than anything, with all this stuff, it's always most telling what they don't say. And I didn't hear AJ Brown saying there, I'm definitely going to be back in Philadelphia. No questions asked. I want to be back. It's all like, that's not what, I didn't hear that. He did say Philly is home. I get that. And look, I think AJ Brown has a lot of love for Philadelphia. Like, I don't think that's his issue with wanting to be gone from the Eagles. I don't think he hates the fans or anything. I don't think that's the case. I think he's frustrated with other things about the team that aren't changing, and therefore I think will want to be gone still.
Well, are these changes maybe enough to change his mind? I mean, are they going to, you would think they would call him and say, AJ, look at what we're doing. We're changing the offense. You're going to get the ball more in theory. Will that be enough? You think that will be enough to win him over a little bit?
I have a hard time believing that, because I don't think that's really why he was frustrated last year, or at least like the biggest reason he was frustrated. I think it's ultimately the dynamic with the quarterback. And that's not to say he necessarily hates Jalen Hurts. I think that kind of gets overblown. But I think it's a matter of, I don't think necessarily he thinks he's the best fit with Jalen Hurts' style of play at this point in time. And not even just that, but also kind of the approach that the team takes in terms of, how they've been conservative here and aren't willing to open it up. And AJ has spoken about that many a time in public. It's not even just me, filling in the blanks. It's his words. So, I think all of that leads me to believe that I just don't think it's like, oh, you hired Sean Mannion, so now AJ's on board.
Yeah, I'm with you with AJ. It's not about people. It's about he hasn't liked the offense. And he hasn't liked the offense for a very long time. I don't think it has to do anything with disliking Nick Sirianni or Jalen Hurts or Kevin Petula or anybody else. It's about his frustration in the style of offense they played. And we'll see how it works out. I've got it dipped. It shifted me a little bit. I've been about 50-50 more AJ leaving. Now I'm back to 50-50 more AJ staying, not because of anything other than it's just so difficult from a cap standpoint. Like if it were a year down the line, I'd be like, he's gone 90%, he's gone. Mm-hmm. But I just think it's so difficult to move him from that perspective. I keep teetering over that 50% line. We never talk about the defense, so I'm going to talk about the defense real quick with you here, BLG. How concerned are you with Jalen Carter? Because he was not himself this season. Mm-hmm. With the persistent shoulder pain, they're using experimental treatments, let's be honest. And in the playoff game against San Francisco, he did not play well. Mm-hmm. How concerned, because I think we all were in that category, this guy's going to be in the Defensive Player of the Year conversation, very young. That's going to be the talent is unbelievable. But if they can't fix this shoulder thing, I mean, the guy who was playing at the second half of the season, that's not the Jalen Carter we all expected. How concerned are you with Jalen Carter?
Yeah, I mean, with the medical situation, I don't know all the details. I don't think any of us do, but that's the big question, because you see the high watermark with him in terms of when he's at his best. He does stuff that I think few other players can. He's very special at his best. Problem is, need to see him more closer to that, or at his best a lot more often. And I think part of it's he played such a massive workload in 2024, and that's kind of
unbelievable. It was over 1,000 snaps for an interior defensive lineman. It's crazy.
For as much as Vic gets right, I think that's kind of a major drawback. Like that's tough, because I think it's hard to say those things aren't related in terms of Jalen Carter. And well, you could argue, it's worth it because they went all in, they won the Super Bowl. Like that's the point. But the cost is that, the player's going to feel it the next year in a major way. And that really didn't set him up for success in 2025. So,
and to your point, BLG, he was on pace to, before they shut him down, he was on pace to have the most snaps of any interior again this season.
Yeah, I think they have to find a way to balance that a little bit better. And I don't know if they will, because, Vic believes what he believes. And if that's one of the drawbacks of Vic Fangio, you certainly take that for all the good you get. But it's huge, because, I think we've all just been assuming like they're going to extend Jalen Carter. And I would tend to think they want to do that still, but like he needs to have a really big year in 2026, because last year was a disappointment, starting from he gets ejected before the season even really starts.
Yeah.
And then just how it unfolded from there. And again, I don't think all of it's necessarily his fault. I think some of it is in his control. And, Vic Fangio is talking about conditioning, and you don't I think that's kind of alarming. You don't want to hear that being an issue. But part of it is just that like it's tough to take on these workloads, and I don't know where he's at medically, and obviously the Eagles have more information on that. But if it's not good, that could prohibit a contract extension.
What did you think of the Micah Parsons comment about, they offered Jalen Carter? I said to John didn't take the bait. I'm like, well, if they offered him for Micah, will they offer him for somebody else? Is he more? I didn't view him as an available to trade type of guy. I understand the player Micah Parsons is, but what'd you make of that story, BLG?
Yeah, I was surprised. I don't know. I don't know how much of that is, real, right? I'm not saying Micah necessarily is lying. I just don't know to what extent.
Yeah, like did Dallas ask for him? Did
right.
the Eagles offer him? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, my guess is not the Eagles were just like, oh yeah, we'd love to trade Jalen Carter. That's not my impression. But maybe it's at the point where like negotiations are so close, and it's like, well, that's what gets it done for us. We really love Micah Parsons, and that could be worth it to us. And we're concerned about Jalen Carter's long-term outlook, maybe with his shoulders or everything. Maybe. But I think there's a lot of detail and nuance that we don't exactly know there.
Well, number one, I don't think Dallas was going to trade him in the division.
Sure. Right, exactly.
Right off the bat. But I do think, and that's what I said, look, if that would have got it done, they would have done it. I do believe that because that's how much they value Micah Parsons.
Yeah.
But to Xander's point of does that mean he's on the trade? No. There's like two players in the world they trade him for, Mike and Miles. That's it.
Right.
So I wouldn't worry about it from that perspective.
Yeah, they weren't like looking to get value for him.
No,
yeah,
right. But that's how I kind of took that standpoint, and from that perspective. Now, I guess I'll end it there. At Brandon Gowton, make sure you follow BLG on the X platform, as Xander mentioned. BleedingGreenNation.com, tremendous website. Get all your Eagles news every morning. I recommend that highly. The coaching staff as a whole, and again, we normally, because there's been such turnover on the offensive side of the ball, the defensive side of the ball not talked about as much. There was the retirement scare for Vic Fangio, however you want to label it, but we now know he's, he can walk away any year, anytime. And the names they mentioned, did that surprise you at all? That the contingencies, when you hear names like Jonathan Gannon, Jim Schwartz, from the perspective, not as much as Gannon. I don't know why Gannon would want to come back, but at least he plays a similar style. So, but this is again scheme dependent. If you're going back to a Jim Schwartz, if Jim is taking a year off and saying, "Hey, maybe I'll come back to Philly," again, you're changing completely with an offense, with a defense that's not built to play how Vic Fangio wants to play. Boy, it's crazy to me to be that centric, or am I overthinking it? And they're just good players. Like Jalen Carter would fit in perfectly with Jim Schwartz.
Yeah.
He'd be the happiest guy on the planet to play for Jim. But that's very few. The linebackers that we thought have been great. The way they play coverage in the secondary would completely change. Same scheme issues. What are we doing here? Are we too scheme dependent, BLG?
I love Schwartz. I've been a big time, Schwartz defender, even back when he was here. I think you look at his track record. It's
he's
awesome.
Great. He's great.
Especially when you look at relative to like what the team invests each year, and you look at that team's injury luck each year, and he always does what at the very basic level I think good coaching is. He does more with less. That is what good coaching is. I think Jim Schwartz, like year after year, does that. He gives you more out of what you have, talent-wise. So yeah, I'm all about that. And hey, he might be back here in Philly next year, depending what happens with him, depending what happens with Vic. There's some buzz about that, and I think that would be a great hire. Obviously, I'm not a Jonathan Gannon guy, and I'm also surprised the Eagles would broach that just from the standpoint of like things left off on a bad note here when with the tampering thing and all that. And my sense was
I don't think it left on a bad note personally.
My sense was that there was some frustration there from some parties within the Eagles, so I was a little bit more surprised about that one. But also, when you're desperate like that, it's not insane to me that they would revisit that.
BLG, good stuff. My last question for you here, and you reserve the right to change. Will Nick Sirianni be here when we're talking a year from now?
I mean, so on brand for me to say no.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm going to say no because, look, I just don't. A big part of my frustration or the criticism that comes from me is just I genuinely don't have a lot of confidence or belief in the value that he specifically adds. So it's possible that I'm wrong about this from a standpoint in my mind of things work out otherwise, because I think that's how things have gone for him in the past. He's had a lot of support, and then he can maybe make the most of that within that system. But I think there's a lot of pressure on Nick going into this year, and I think he's going to have to do a much better job than he has done in the past, because I think he didn't do a very good job last year. Jim Schwartz, do more with less, because I think he might have less in 2026, and I don't have full confidence that he's going to be able to do that. So I think he's been better in the front runner position, and I don't think the Eagles are necessarily going to be in that position this year.
BLG, we'll see, man. Appreciate you joining in today. Make sure everybody goes and follows BLG at Brandon Gowton and read all his work at bleedinggreennation.com. If you're an Eagles fan and you're not on Bleeding Green Nation, you're not being as good of a fan as you can be. So go check it out. BLG, thank you.